Hello, everyone, and hi, Fiona. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to have a very engaging LinkedIn live session. Thank you, everyone, for being here, for following up on our call. Um, we're going to be discussing the Europe's role in blockchain and distributed ledger technology standardization today. And our special guest, Fiona Delaney from SEEBLOCKS, will share her experience and insights from working on this intriguing and important project. So we'll begin, as usual, first getting to know Fiona a bit more personally about her journey into the blockchain field and especially your role in SEEBLOCKS. And then we'll go a bit more into what SEEBLOCKS even is. I'm pretty sure that, it's not just me being curious about what are the main objective of this project, but also perhaps what are the challenges and, what are the solutions that we can implement to kind of overcome those. And then we're going to explore the SEEBLOCKS, how it actually aligns with the broader EU initiatives, those being EBSI, etc., especially having in mind that there is this new coming standardization in Europe as well. So talking about that, we will be addressing both the technologies and, of course, we cannot pass the regulatory environment. So we'll definitely dive into that as well. This session will highlight the critical role of standards. And the reason for that is that we do have a small assumption that the standards in the future may somehow, perhaps to a certain extent, even replace the regulation that we are currently dealing with, possibly ensuring, the future innovation, maintaining all the security and compliance. So let's see. Let's begin. First off, as previously said, we do have an amazing woman here on the call. I do hope that I'm going to do you the honor, Fiona.
Yeah.
So let me start. You are a blockchain strategic lead at SEEBLOCKS.eu, and you do have strong industry experience in DeFi and fintech, as well as the enterprise blockchain context. And in that particular part, you've been the co-founder of At Origin Chain Networks. You've done an amazing research. You've earned the EU Innovation Award in 2020. There's been contributions going both into the technology, the agriculture, and then on top of that, you are a software engineer. So I already love the profile. There's been so much like all together. Yeah, so there's been a lot of innovation, the research altogether. There's been numerous co-authored papers that you've written. And then just like a cherry on top, you're also the chair of the Irish Blockchain Mirror Committee and the co-chair of the European Standards Observatory Blockchain Working Group.
Yeah.
So all in all, that's amazing. I think there's like a silver lining that goes, towards the standardization. But yeah, my first question for you would really be, how did you even land in this space? Like what really brought you? How come you decided to become a software engineer and then move along with the enterprise and the standardization?
Uh, well, firstly, Anya, thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm really interested to meet this community and very much welcome any questions or comments along the way. I'm really, really open to that. Second of all, it's funny that you say, like, on top of it, I'm a software engineer, because for me, that's what I am. And that was the start for me in terms of getting into getting into standardization, but also into I would say European innovation. I mean, prior to that, like many people, I had various side hustles or interests, or I was always a
Mhm.
person who could monetize their hobby, kind of thing, played in a band, did toured the
Oh
world a
wow,
little bit,
okay.
like, so I'm like a go-getter type, right? I mean, it's a kind of like a personality type, and I'm relatively fearless, I would say. Well, not risk averse, or not overly risk averse, but definitely pretty fearless. So things like taking a chance on things don't really psych me out. And I think that's probably a common attribute for many entrepreneurs, and particularly tech entrepreneurs. So I have loads of friends who are, software developers, software engineers, enterprise, technical people who would never in their days get involved in startups, or maybe the more risky or precarious kind of side of emerging technologies. So it takes a certain type, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
That's an observation that I have. So I think that sort of that character trait is probably something that has landed me in this position. And I'd founded my company after I kind of got interested in blockchain generally. I got so I was a programmer, interested. I was an engineer, had certainly come across cryptocurrency. Everybody used to tip everybody, things like tip bots and that kind of thing. There's loads of meetups like back in the day, like 2015, 2016, 2017. Lots of really interesting things happen. And there was an awful lot of crossover, I would say, between things like artificial intelligence, computer vision. People were experimenting with lots of things like TensorFlow and getting into both crypto or blockchain, and also exciting things that were happening at the emergence of AI before we really had things like large language models to kind of play around with. So in the sort of tech curious world, there was just loads of stuff happening. And I really got drawn into the emerging context around blockchain. So like 2017, 2018, blockchain was going to change the world, the trust machine, it would solve all supply chain problems. And the aspirational blockchain developers didn't realize that the problems with supply chains are not the supply chains, it's the people. Governance and people and human systems are the problem there, or the unknown quantity, let's say. So there was a lot of idealism, probably, I would say, in that time. And I was a builder, and it was easy to build things, write smart contracts, whip things together, experiment. And I really saw quite quickly that there was something quite meaningful for that relationship between a brand or product owner and the consumer. I was kind of interested in that relationship. And I guess I didn't really see it in marketing terms. I just saw it as an opportunity, building things that kind of filtered away some of the structure in between and created that lovely maybe brand experience or product experience or consumer experience that could be extended. I definitely saw it at the time as a kind of an extended reality type experience, an increasingly digital experience. And I saw the value of blockchain and crypto as both a trust layer. I'm assuming quite a lot of understanding on the part of your audience here, but I'm assuming that people know what blockchains are and know what cryptocurrencies are or crypto assets already. So I saw that as being part of the kind of digital society that we were moving into. And I just saw, for people like me who were technical people, total nerds, I was like, wow, this whole world is kind of exciting. And I saw the pathway to entrepreneurship through that, through building things that people would use, and systems that optimized something in that brand to consumer communication and exchange or transaction. So, I'm built loads of things. And then set up my company. I'm based in Ireland, and agri-food is like the biggest industry here. So I started in an R&D kind of way, running proof of concepts with various different projects, public sector type engagements, awareness raising. Ireland is a small country. Always, I think people in your community will understand that the B2G pathway to enterprise or entrepreneurship is a long one. So my company is almost not a startup anymore, and we have extended our brief and are involved in a number of different research initiatives, decentralized science initiatives, collaborating with other innovators. I would still say it's in that R&D kind of phase, but starting to look at blockchain as a resilient infrastructure that supports research. I would say experimentation in the marketplace, scaffolding for cooperative engagements or projects, like European funded projects, for example, sometimes, because you can track engagement and IP, and you can create a common understanding of or reputation as actors in systems. So using all of those Web3 type things like soul-bound tokens or rewards and incentives in short-term projects or bounded projects and bounded communities, and deploying them in pretty interesting ways. I think we're still quite in the early stages. I think it's interesting, your own group, crypto initiative. I think DeFi and crypto generally, digital assets, is definitely the largest, most operational industry sector where we're seeing real delivery of value. And just year on year, the sheer growth and volume of trades in crypto is just astounding. And it's very exciting to have been around. I mean, crypto years are like dog years, you know. I'm actually 200 years old. So, it's really, really interesting to see just how fast things are moving in terms of, let's say, blockchain and crypto, but also to see in parallel that regulatory shift, particularly in Europe, and tracking. It's because it's not really regulation that only relates to crypto. It's really about the digitalization or the digital transformation in society. I mean, there are people who opt out of, operating online. There certainly are people like that. But everywhere, practically everywhere in Europe, schools have policies around digital engagement. A school, I think, anywhere in Europe that didn't have a policy that encouraged young people to learn about and engage with technology would be considered in some way to be disadvantaging their students in some way, So we are 100% a kind of a hybrid digital society. And obviously in different places in the globe, that's happening at different paces with different incumbencies. So we would see that there's a difference, let's say, between the eastern part of Europe and the western part of Europe. The eastern part of Europe almost had a clean slate coming out of the 80s into the 90s, and didn't have, legacy systems that they needed to pay to overhaul or get the value out of first. And we see that kind of rolling legacy issue frequently in optimization or change management schemes in digital transformation, particularly for governments or government departments. And so, bringing it back to the European point, I became very, very interested in how was European policy, more so the policy than the regulation, because the policy kind of nudges you forward and makes it, opens up business and trade opportunities, probably.
It's not restrictive.
Yeah. So, and then seeing how that was manifesting for itself. So in 2018, with the advent of the European Blockchain Partnership and all governments signing that, and the instantiation of the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure, supporting European governments to explore this new, potentially, game-changing technology, which was blockchain and all the promise of crypto and the digital trust machine, and so many of these different aspects that were poorly understood at the time, and so now we have these infrastructures supporting governments, and then different governments across the European Union embraced that opportunity at different paces, which has been really, really interesting, I think, to see. And and we're at a very interesting time in Europe with our regulation, and how regulation is facing citizen first type policies, DORA, which is Digital Operational Resilience Act, which is about protecting the systems which are used to deal with consumers. So that can be trade, it can be exchange and payments, it can be data management systems, and creating those not just ISO standards or protocol standards like how to use the internet, but
Right.
in Europe, we now have laws that require the systems that we use for business and trade to be operationally resilient.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fantastic thing, particularly when I think of the industry I come from, which is Web3, where I mean, loosely called Web3. Who even knows what that means? But let's say Web3. So I don't just mean blockchain, or I don't just mean crypto. I just mean,
Right.
DLTs used in business for communications and everything else. And so in our space, there is just a very, very intense amount of individual actors in the space who, depending on where they're coming from, are using the space and those technical resources in a way that is almost like a game. And sometimes we see that as opportunistic and, influencers building profile, or a
Winning
campaign,
rules.
or a
Yeah.
project, shilling to an extent. I'm not totally averse to shilling and influencers or anything like that. But I also, what are we doing and for our business? This is our marketplace, and
Mm-hmm.
what guidance and what rules do we need? So Europe is attempting to set those standards that meet the laws and regulations, which are to the benefit, usually, I would
Mm-hmm.
say, to the citizenry first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty interesting, because I think in many other trade territories, they don't lead from the citizen first.
True. Yeah.
And I think that experiment, this sort of democratic experiment that is the European Union, the glue that binds us together is that nation states, in the face of that community, will always put their citizens first. And so
That's
that's the thing that they can agree on, protect citizens first. So it's an interesting consequence, I think. And when I think of it like that, because I am an optimistic person, I I can, it's something to be proud of, and I'm not at all afraid of regulations or boundaries or sandboxes or
It
that
is
kind
what
of
it
thing.
is. No.
It's what it is, and it's there. It's a moment in time, So if we think about the fast pace of technology change,
Mm-hmm.
we can see that while the ways that we do things this year will technically, will not be the same in 5 years' time. So
Of course.
whatever
Yeah.
standards we have, they need to change, and whatever laws we have will need to keep up with the pace of digital society.
Mm-hmm. Change is the only constant that we have, right?
100%.
Uh,
And that's why we need blockchain.
Absolutely. 100%
I
agree
think we're
on that.
finished now, are we?
We can close it here now. I do want to encourage the public, if there's any questions,
Yeah.
we do have Viara in the back end helping us out, getting all these questions, comments, feedbacks, whatever you have, it's all going to be very much welcome. So just copy or write a question right into the comment section on LinkedIn. But yeah, I did want to ask you, Fiona, what role does C-blocks play here? Like, how does it, fill the gap? There's obviously standardizations, there's obviously laws and regulations that are coming in, and there's constant innovation, constant change. But yeah, what role is the organization playing here?
So if we start from where I left off, Europe has
Right.
policies and rolling plans for standards across all kinds of technologies. The ICT rolling plan, which is open and updatable and citizens can contribute to. So there's a whole load of stuff in there about AI and 5G and cloud computing and quantum
Mm-hmm.
cryptography and all sorts of different things. And that's annually updated about the areas of interest and concern, probably where there are gaps. And industry groups like UOS, for example, can contribute to that, pointing to where we see existing gaps for current emerging trends, like in the new types of energy creation, renewable energies, hydrogen created from methane or some combination of some chemical process, and new standards are required, maybe to instantiate health and safety at the edge of some kind of decentralized energy creation. So these are like brand new things that need to be facilitated with digital technology in mind. So if farms, for example, are going to be diversifying their energy production and creating their own energy on site. In some parts of Europe, that might be solar. In other parts, it could be wind or maybe water related if there's maybe ice flows or something like that, and you can capture that. In Ireland, it might be from biodigesters and methane capture. And what we need is digital infrastructure at the edge of the networks to capture that. And we need, if it is energy creation and we need reconciliation at the edge, sometimes you can create you don't have to create, you don't have to use blockchains, but if you are using that kind of system, you can create this immutable record of creation and exchange and do kind of just-in-time reconciliation. Again, and we see that in new institutional approaches to using blockchain in finance. Just-in-time reconciliation across JP Morgan, for example, their new initiative. Very, very interesting. But you can see the same thing happening. It's essentially an IoT approach to data management in different industry systems. And you can do the same thing or see the same thing right across all kinds of industries, because the imperative being, we are a digital society with a hybrid kind of digital, so analog and digital together in that space. And I saw it in my own company. Blockchains, it is an emerging space in an emerging context. Blockchains can offer an amazing resource as almost scaffolding while markets are developing, because you have this immutable record, you have very strong binding of identity management and data provenance, and it can be very, very cyber secure, with permanent records, which into the future become archival records, which can be hugely, hugely important as we are seeing these new markets for all kinds of things develop. So standards are needed for all of that. And we see, I see standards development very much as part of open innovation. So open innovation, open source technologies, open data initiatives, and standards are just are methods that we have, for many years, particularly both in protocol type standards, like W3C standards, which are internet protocols, which make it possible for remote computers and servers and data centers and all kinds of things to operate, and 5G networks and that kind of thing. Everything can work because of standards, in interoperability standards. And even the video that we're looking at now, that has a video codec, which makes it possible to record and live stream and then be viewed again later, because the machine reading it, the machine capturing it, that's the codec, and the machine reading it understands what that standard is and can play it back at whatever way it needs to be. So essentially, in all of these things, we need standards to be able to do business together. And increasingly, we see standards in that place where business standards, because business is instantiated on digital systems, can be optimized through the use of standards. And so meeting the law becomes a matter of deploying some sort of system, digital system frequently, that if you have standards in place, makes that process easier, better understood, and optimized. So the engineer in me, of course, is Simplify, optimize.
So it's not just the trustworthiness, it's actually that it becomes reliable. It's very so that we can use it. It's, yeah, resolving all the
Absolutely.
issues that we're having.
Okay, so where does SEEBLOCKS fit into all of
Right.
this? So Europe, rolling plan. The European infrastructures like EBSI, European Blockchain Partnership, European digital identities, MICA, DORA, all of these different kinds of things, as they apply to blockchain, need researchers, industry researchers, to identify the challenges and the opportunities in their industry where those policies, regulations, and where market trends are going. What are they seeing? What do we need to operate resiliently,
Right.
securely, and in an optimized fashion in order to deliver our business services into that single digital marketplace, the European single digital marketplace. So SEEBLOCKS is a 2-year project, funded because because this the way I understand it is the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure Project is becoming a part of a wider European digital services infrastructure. And in order for blockchain to be treated in that system as a foundational technology, which it is policy-wise, but operationally, additional standards need to be created. So our project funds researchers who are engaging specifically in blockchain research in international standards. So that can be, there are tons and tons of both national, European, and international types of standards development organizations. So in Europe, we have CEN, CENELEC, CEN-CENELEC, ETSI, so not EBSI, ETSI, ETSI. We also have ISO, ITU, the UN is a standards creating organization. In the US, we've got NIST, very kind of famous around cryptography, and many other different cybersecurity types of standards. There's many of them. And then in the blockchain world, because it is protocols and open source software and open source systems, there's all kinds of standards that exist in Bitcoin, in Ethereum, and so ERC 20, which is the original token. ERC means Ethereum request for comment, which, like the original internet protocols, that's how the internet was basically agreed upon. There's a notice board, people are proposing something, other people are commenting on it, and then when all the comments are resolved, well, then that's the standard. So in the world of those open source protocols, that tradition continues. Often where there are smart contracts involved in the blockchain world, in order for an ERC to be fully approved as a standard, it is audited. So it's formally audited. And that's a process that the proposers must go through with the Ethereum Foundation. So it's very, very interesting process, and anybody actually can join in and can make their comments and contribute to the development of those open standards. There's some really interesting ones. The recent landscape report that we published from SEEBLOCKS looks at the formal consensus of organizations like CEN and CEN-CENELEC and ISO, and contrasts it to the informal consensus process that is common in ETSI, W3C, and the world of Bitcoin standards, Ethereum standards, and all those other protocol standards. And that is that more informal, yet striving for consensus. If for anyone who's ever participated in those communities or those commentaries, there's a culture of driving towards consensus of agreement, and that's a very positive. It's a very positive thing, very positive process. And similarly, the difference in ISO and SEN is that you participate as an individual expert, and at a certain point, when a standard is almost near completion, all nation states have their standards authority, and that authority takes a national position and votes. So nation states vote on and approve those formal international standards.
That's for the international standards. I
Yeah,
wonder because,
ISO. Yeah.
right, yeah. And if we go back to the European Blockchain Service Infrastructure, right, the more
EBSI.
known as
Yeah.
the EBSI acronym, I would assume that EBSI is not really having like a request for change just yet,
Oh, but
or maybe.
well, no, that was a really open process, to be honest.
All right.
They established a number of different. I mean, originally when I got involved with it, I think there was like 3 use cases. One was self-sovereign identity, one was education certificates, and one was, I can't remember what the other one was. Anyway, there's 6 or 9 now. There's a whole bunch of
Right.
them, and of course, all of that work has contributed to the development of the European sandbox, the blockchain sandbox, which is now a regulatory sandbox and allows very interesting proposals, which can be proposed by universities or government or industry or startups or researchers can propose something very interesting to run, to submit to the blockchain sandbox to ensure that that approach and that system, or that set of smart contracts operates in such a way that data privacy concerns are not broken, or security concerns are not broken, or identity management or digital identity, or the treatment of digital identities can be observed, and it could even inform the European digital identity strategy, for example. It's a research, it's a kind of a research lab of business and industry and communications, and testing it against European regulation to see that those systems and proposals are robust. So very much an R&D type thing. So from my point of view as an engineer, the R&D piece is, build it and see if it falls over.
Right.
From a legal point of view, let's say you have 3 different core types of interoperability. You've got technical interoperability. Do the machines talk to each other across
Right.
these organizational boundaries?
Are they
Great.
compatible?
Great. And then from the legal point of view, like, do they talk to each other? Okay, that works. Are the terms of the contract or the terms of the social contract being met within the bounds of this promise or this transaction that's happening on digital infrastructure? So the legal interoperability can be about trade and trade territories. It can be about the citizen and the service provider, and how those, let's say, those roles, those stakeholders' roles, are bounded and protected in the system, in these novel systems. The challenge, I think, really is around decentralization and understanding the impact of decentralization as the cooperative oversight model, I suppose, in blockchain systems. That tends to be what you're instantiating in technology first. And with blockchain systems, you have to design them first, so before they're operational. So I hope I haven't lost everybody.
No, not at all. I want to bring us back to the hands-on experience or the hands-on contribution of SEEBLOCKS and yourself. You said previously that you've been involved with EBSI since the get-go, basically. What does it look like? So SEEBLOCKS provides the research, it provides standards to EBSI. How do you align with the goals of EBSI?
So EBSI is the European Blockchain Services Infrastructure, and that's more or less standalone and does its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's in transition to the European Digital Services Infrastructure, so blockchain will just be one part of that.
Mm-hmm.
The European standards, technical standards, seek to address and meet the European business environment, which may or may not be around blockchain. That could be around AI and blockchain, the role of
Makes sense.
blockchain in AI enabled systems,
Mm-hmm.
and tracking decision taking or tracking advices and guidances or decision assistance, that kind of. I mean, there's a real emerging context there where there are many unknowns.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, people often ask, Anya, can you standardize too early? Or I think in regulation, many businesses or many business people say, oh, don't regulate too early.
Right.
I definitely think it's a feature now. I think it's quite common now in our industry for people to say regulation is a good thing.
Hmm.
It's welcome because the instability of the markets around crypto generally, not always DeFi, but the kind of flocking degen culture, it's really, really unstable for
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
businesses, and it drives businesses into a terminal short-termism, where businesses are running product launches kind of like marketing campaigns rather than building
Something
longitudinal,
stable.
resilient,
Yeah.
sustainable businesses, because that's not what the early market was rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so personally, and especially with my work in the world of DeFi, again, that was in like real world asset creation and tokenization. So again, bringing that connection between the real world into that digital realm, so that digital hybrid space, and that is, and if you're going to be a financial services provider, fintech provider, you've got to meet financial service regulation. That's
Right.
just it.
Yeah.
Those regulations aren't going anywhere. And just because you're using cryptocurrency, it's one thing to transact. I could send you a payment or something like that, you and me to our wallets, we can do that. And we
Right.
can do that because of open standards and wallets. But if I want to make that my business and facilitating payments between other people, now I'm a service provider and I have to comply with financial service provision regulation, whether that's custodial or the finer details of custodial, non-custodial,
Mm-hmm.
all
Mm-hmm.
that kind of stuff is where it becomes really interesting, and where in terms of the legalities, um, it's funny from a technician point of view. Like, you could sort of flip a switch kind of thing. You could like turn something on or turn something off, and it's custodial, it's not custodial. But on the legal side, it really matters if you're taking
Mm-hmm.
custody. It really, really
Right.
matters. And just because it's easy to flip a switch in technology doesn't mean it's easy to do as a business, and
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
get, not fall foul of, you could walk into a number of different problems there. So I think all of us, business people, crypto people, the legal side of things, we all need to grow up a little bit. I say, as a crypto person, and
That's nicely put. Yeah.
and then learn to speak each other's language, or at least hear each other's language,
Mm-hmm.
and build and iterate quicker. There's
Yeah.
definitely something there about taking some lessons from the tech side,
Mm-hmm.
about tempo, and bounding things in time, as well as things like sandboxes. They're
Mm-hmm.
great, and we really need to work together with that. You know,
Yeah.
the other interoperability I was going to mention, you can have a governance interoperability. So you've got
Mm-hmm.
technical and legal, and you can have governance as well. So I think that's the missing piece. That's the least advanced piece. We have in crypto. We've got a lot of different insights around, you know, voting and participation schemes and incentive schemes and soul band tokens and reputation tokens and all of these different kinds of things. But if they're not connected to the real value of product, service, and meaning for the individuals and value for the businesses, it can be legally correct and you can technically do it. But if it's not delivering on value, it's going to die. And so that governance piece about, which can take many layers, but if they are decentralized systems and governed as much by the participants as by the builders, well, I think the communities need to grow up and seek more and better, and definitely better UX.
Absolutely. It sounds almost as if we're climbing the ladder, starting with the technicalities and then recognizing, oh, yeah, but we also need to establish some code is the law, or at least some sort of rules around what exactly is happening. Because to be very frank with you, I mean, I love the fact that whenever we are talking about technicalities, whenever we are talking about tech, it's all very much deterministic. And then when it comes to the law, the regular thing that you hear from the lawyer is it depends, right? But then also
it
the
could be
lack
this,
of
but
regulation,
it could be
right?
this.
Yeah. And the lack of regulation really did not do anyone a favor, because it pushed everyone towards let's just build fast and break things and let's see what happens. It wasn't really beneficial for us on a long term. So I'm really glad that we are now seeing at least a bit of a push from the European Union. You can see it elsewhere as well, but Europe has really established itself as in let's provide a regulatory framework, let's provide some legal clarity. And now the thing that you mentioned, the third interoperability with the governance approach, that really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's the missing piece, right? Yeah,
it definitely is. Yeah, it's how we get through everything, basically, because we, at the end of the day, need to agree on certain things, right? And how do we agree? How do we get there? Like, what's the voting going to be like, or who's eligible for vote, for providing the votes in the first place? Those are all very,
and
very
is even voting like a
the
great?
right
I don't
thing.
want to sound anti-democratic or something. I really love the fact that we live in a democracy, but
Right.
I mean, it's like if we're thinking about service level agreements, and do we vote on those or do we
No.
negotiate? You know what I mean?
Do we even
Like,
negotiate those though?
yeah, well, I mean, you can to a degree, right? But most of the time, where we are in Europe, we have choice, right?
Yeah.
Because monopolies are disincentivized, so there usually is market choice, and consumers do have that opportunity to switch providers. I'm thinking about telecoms, I'm thinking about, various different systems,
Forking.
energy systems, like all these different kinds of things, and subscriber systems, the gym that you go to, like you definitely can negotiate your way into like some kind of free trial or, whatever. And these things are, I don't know. I don't know what the total answer is, but we are definitely moving forward into this hybrid digital space. We've got this digital society with digital economies, and it's the governance piece, the human factor again, that we're evolving into this space, and it's very exciting for me, and I think for everybody in the space, to be building things, creating product, solving problems. The opportunity is huge, and we're at this very, very exciting time. Hence, requiring SEEBLOCKS and specific accelerators for blockchain standardization, meeting the demands of, so SEEBLOCKS and Europe take a kind of business or industry first approach, generally speaking. There are, in fact, one of the recently funded parties is taking a particularly consumer-centric view, and he's looking at blockchain and consumer-centric systems, and standardizing various different aspects, or kind of more like a literature review, I would say, of blockchain and the consumer, and scoping that out a little bit. That's really interesting for digital society. And it's not only about, wallets or self-sovereign identities or, transaction speeds, and all of that can be standardized as well, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's not only inward facing, is what I mean. And the European Commission view and support of like the law, the policy, and sort of digital strategies in Europe are all pointing towards standards and business, standards and industry, standards and citizen, or like standards, how the standards support the citizen in living their life, engaging with government, education, doing business, conducting business. And then, of course, I mean, not to forget, like the European commitment to being net zero by 2050, let's say. How do we know we have achieved that? If it is even possible to achieve that.
Right.
You've got to measure something to prove that you've achieved that standard, whatever that standard is, and then you need to maintain that. So all of these ambitions are fantastic, but without like the standard to reach, well, then how do we get there? And I'm really pleased to say that a number of different standards researchers are looking particularly at sustainability as a core issue, and the environmental impact of blockchain or high compute services. So that would even include the focus for SEEBLOCKS is blockchain, but some of the similar concerns exist for both AI and big data and that kind of thing. Like, do we really need somebody using large language models to create my shopping list? You can do it on Google and it doesn't have the same environmental impact as using an AI system to make a similar query. So I think I'm not saying don't use large language models and and not use blockchain or anything like that. I'm saying
be selective.
Well, in the same way that we all have fridges or whatever that are like A rating, G rating, I think we all we're all going to have to understand the digital cost in energy of how we use our technology, and all of that can only be achieved through standards. Yeah.
For example, the client perspective, or let's say consumer perspective, the cost perspective, are those, for example, the evaluation criteria that contribute towards you deciding that this is how the standard is going to look like, or this is what the standard is going to be in the first place?
Okay, well, I give you a potted history of one standard that I worked on from the beginning. So in ISO TC 307, which is for blockchain and DLT. I contributed to a bunch of them, and I'm project lead for another couple of them. But if I pick one recently that was published, which is data flow models for blockchain use case descriptions. So it's essentially a standard to support people designing blockchain systems and including blockchain in their businesses so that they can understand data flows, on-chain and off-chain data flows in the European context. You're advised not to put private personal data onto blockchains because of GDPR. So all of these different kinds of things, you can have GDPR proof that blockchain enabled systems, and so we will be looking at things like data flow modeling and standardizing a way of describing that, so that when we're comparing and contrasting different system approaches, we're able to see very clearly where the vulnerabilities might be in diverse trade territories, because ISO is completely global. Europe is only one small part of all of the other trade areas and geographic areas that would be represented there. So it's very interesting that you get to see the European approach versus the Chinese approach. Is also, they have I think they call it very important data, which is a similar concept. So highly protected data, and that has a different standing in their regulatory environment, and it must be treated differently in digital systems. In the US, they have, I think it's aligned more with kind of confidentiality, a bit like military type systems, different classifications. I'm not completely sure, but they again have, special data categories that must also be protected. So we're creating generic systems or approaches, standardized approaches that can help us examine those business systems and be used in any trade territory in order to examine potential vulnerabilities, whether that's secure system or legal or anything else. So how does a standard come about? In ISO, a new work item must be proposed by a nation state. It must be accepted by either by vote, by ballot, by a majority of participating nations, or it can be voted at a plenary by a quorum of participating nations. So nation states are represented at the plenaries. And that's how a new work item proposal is initiated. Then you must have, I couldn't just write it myself. I have to, you become, a project lead is essentially a facilitator of contributions, accepting, guiding, encouraging where there might be gaps, contributions from industry partners, from liaison organizations, from nation states, from industry organizations. And currently I'm a project lead for, it's called ISO 24878. Everybody loves a good number in ISO. And it's on new and emerging blockchain use cases. So we're looking specifically for very, very emerging contexts. So things, looking at AI or quantum or, so transversal technologies or emerging marketplaces. So if anybody's got any ideas, I'm totally open to guiding you through that process. There is, of course, a standard template that you must complete. And then it gets submitted to WG6, which is for the use cases. And then it is discussed in a forum of experts. And a consensus is formed around the acceptability or the quality or the newness, maybe, or of what that use case is. It's not up to me. It's really project leaders are moderating consensus.
How much time does it normally take? Is it totally dependent on the topic, or is there a normal time?
So it must go through at least 2 working group ballots and at least 1 full technical committee ballot. And they are a ballot each time is either usually 8 weeks or 12 weeks. And depending on the feedback, which is from all the experts, all the nation states, so the national standards authorities encourage their local teams to contribute and comment and all that kind of thing. Comment resolution can take months and months and months. And then you might go to ballot on the first part of your report or your standard. And when that gets solidified and agreed, you might move on to the next part. So a standard can take years to make.
All right. Could be a bit tricky knowing that, blockchain space moves with the speed of light almost. So I can imagine that being a bit challenging when technology actually changes quite a lot.
Well, it's very interesting because if we're talking about smart contracts or if we're talking about protocol standards, those protocol standards, which some of them we looked at in the landscape report, like ERC 3643, I think it's called, which is a regulated token exchange, which is was authored by Tokeny, I think. It's already being operationalized in a number of different banking institutions, and talking about legal and technical interoperability, that facilitates governance oversight of regulated token exchange.
Cool.
Really, really interesting use case, which requires one of the stakeholders has to be a licensed financial service provider type, like BaFin or MiFID or whatever the particular requirement is. And that entity is like registered on chain and must and is legally obliged to take that oversight role in that particular setup. Really, really interesting. So it completely supports the digitalization of financial service and like investment type, so bond creation and purchase and trade and all that kind of stuff. There's another one as well, which I really like, which came from the Ape Swap community. It changed their name, I think, to Ape Bond now. And they created a standard called the Transferable Vesting NFT. So it's an NFT-based system for as an investment vehicle, which the NFT can be traded, but maintains the vesting schedule. So you're increasing the stability into the marketplace. It's quite a crypto type solution. So that's
very interesting.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And we have some information about both of those in that landscape report. I can see my colleagues have shared some links in the chat there about some of these things. So, and those types of standardization are ERC standards, which go through that informal consensus. And of course, they're open source technology, like they are smart contracts. They are operational anyway. And of course, we know in software, anybody or programming, code is, I wouldn't call it God, but it's definitely whatever you code is going to happen. No, maybe not what you want to happen, but it's definitely, that's what's going to happen. And so you can write your own smart contracts anyway. Nobody can stop you. But you can put anything on the internet. Some people say, oh, it's terrible that, smart contracts, there's no app store that has to,
you have Open Zeppelin, so you have shops where the code has been verified at least. But
well, yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, I don't want to talk about jailbreaking iPhones, but let's say Android phones, right? You can have an app. You don't have to go through the Play Store.
Right.
Like people can share apps that they build and just, stick them on their phone and operate them. So in the same way that anybody can build a website and put it on the internet, doesn't mean that you're going to be great at doing business. Doesn't mean you're not going to get busted for doing bad business, but anybody can kind of build anything. And so it's in some senses, it's again, the Wild West, because all nations everywhere are online at once. All those laws apply to their businesses anyway, but they're not necessarily the same. So we need technical standards to talk, so machines can talk to each other, even though humans might speak different languages. The machines got to talk to each other, so we need standards for that. And then business standards. We need, if a European is trading with a Malaysian, they need, give me the set of rules that means I'm not going to break the law in either state. That's so you need your checklist, you need a governance piece, and that is the whole purpose. So in SEEBLOCKS, we set up a strategy board to look at how broad a reach did we want to take, and we agreed to take a very European view, which was that this is about supporting digital society, supporting the single digital marketplace, and understanding that the regulatory policy and digital strategy European context fits into the wider industry context of business in the world, that geopolitical state, and that the world of standardization is a constant process of ameliorating communication, business, and trade to the benefit, hopefully, of the consumer, and business and innovation. So it's not about stopping things; it's actually about optimizing things. I would say standards in particular, regulations tend to be big levers to prevent things like capital flight, for example, or to prevent monopolies, or to prevent the wholesale gouging of consumers, or the commodification of citizens and citizens' data. Without law or intervention there, I think European citizens, it's arguably too late anyway, but I'm an optimist, so I'm not going to
Right.
say that. So the wholesale commodification of citizenry as targets of advertising, or content generators or data generators for big companies with the capability to harvest that kind of data. You need regulation and the common good, like imperative there, I would say. And I don't think that legislators can legislate without that improved pathway of communication with technical experts and technical expertise, because as we move, we're only moving like further into this hybrid digital society. Without that common ground, without being able to understand each other, we can't make laws that mean anything in the digital systems we're building. And likewise, we can't build these digital systems without that piece of guidance.
Right.
So SEEBLOCKS is very much seeing itself in that position, and sees itself having a role in knowledge transfer, awareness raising, supporting those amazing researchers who are doing all that amazing research and contributing to open standards, because there's very, very few companies that will keep people on the payroll as standards nerds. Like that's that's not really a very big thing. There are some companies that do that, like back in the day, let's say Microsoft and IBM, and really, really big global companies might have taken that tack. But as we're moved into this faster pace and the sort of open source development of systems, we see that focus shifting away from big company proprietary type solutions into third-party provider stacks in cloud-enabled systems. So the role of standards in business and being that interface, the glue between those three sides of interoperability is increasingly important. And I'm here to say it's an exciting space to be in. It's really interesting, really amazing people. If you like solving things, which most engineers do, this is a problem space, where different types of systems kind of come together. Like we were talking about the sandbox, or we're talking about EBSI, where the way Europe sees itself, like as a bounded context, and serving the single digital marketplace, and then outside of that, so we have the European Digital Product Passport, and that's importing into trading inside. All of these things are it's human systems instantiated in technologies.
That's beautifully said. I'll actually keep it that way. I think we're gonna put it into writing as well. But one thing I did want to say, we can approach the time, and we'll have to conclude very soon. I see that we had one question from Joao. Hey, Joao. I think we actually answered both of the questions along the way, to be very honest, because we addressed especially what does it mean to have standardization and regulation in terms of the freedom of creation. So I think we've actually answered that it goes very much hand in hand, and that both are sort of necessary, that it can even enhance the creation, the creativity, right? And then, do you believe there can be too much regulation to where creativity and new technologies and are thereby disincentivized? Yes and no. The way I see, the way from the conversation today, I'm actually becoming a bit more optimistic as well. So thank you, Fiona, for shedding the light on that, making us all recognize that this is very much a needed aspect, and that it can actually lead the innovation even forward.
And through projects like SEEBLOCKS, so I don't run it. I don't. These are independently assessed applications. So if there's anybody here who's interested in getting involved in standards creation, the then in fact, there's a deadline towards the end of this month, the 20th of May. Just go onto the SEEBLOCKS website. There's a big button on the front page that is like apply here now. It's not terribly cumbersome process. You will need to know a little bit about the world of standards, and if you don't yet, I would get in touch with your national standards authority. There's one in every country in Europe. They will have lots of pathways to engage. They're always looking for contributions. I am looking for contributions to my new technical standard about new and emerging blockchain use cases. So there's an opportunity there where you could submit for funding to craft and describe. There's visualizations and everything. It's in UML. You've got to be able to draw diagrams. So you could make a submission to something like that. And in use cases, and new and emerging use cases, that's, I mean, if you're a technical person, that's about as creative as it gets, you know.
That's very broad.
It's a really interesting world. I would definitely encourage you. SEEBLOCKS is all about information sharing. There's a lot of information available on the website. We've got a nice standards visualization tool that you can click into, and you're able to find blockchain specific standards, and any new standard that is being published, we're kind of doing a little spotlight on it, that when it's relating to blockchain and DLT. And of course, we're funding researchers to help forge those new standards into the future. And that can be through the UN, through ITU, through ISO, it could be through ERCs, it could be, you know, whatever your thing is. Go have a look. Yeah, the worst thing we could do is say no. I'm sorry, that's not a thing, and you can carry on about your business.
Remain optimistic.
Yeah.
Definitely apply. Very
for
cool.
sure.
No, that's a great call to action. And thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Fiona, for making the time. This has been a wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it. Hope you did as well.
Very much so, Anya. Thank you so much, and thank you to the community for listening in. I really, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you today.
Yeah, there's been a lot of comments that we've received along the way. So for everyone, if there's any other comments, feedback, questions, I think you can all reach out to Fiona. As she mentioned, there's a call to action. Help her out with the standardization. I think that's going to be the future of blockchain. But yeah, for everybody, if you're also kind of interested in the regulatory updates, if you want to know more about the publications or the position papers that we do as the European Crypto Initiative, feel free to reach out to us as well. We just renovated the website. It's very informative. It has the whole EUCpedia on right now. Also, you know, subscribe to a newsletter. It's full of information. And you'll get the information about our next LinkedIn Live as soon as we're going to announce it. So yeah, very much looking forward to have another conversation with you, Fiona, in the future. Yeah. And until then, thank you so much and have a nice evening.
Thank you, Anya. Good night, everybody.